The universe, in all its infinite wisdom and spectacular lack of foresight, has a peculiar habit of creating civilizations that believe they've got it all figured out. You know the type. They discover faster-than-light travel, colonize a few dozen star systems, and suddenly they're sending out brochures for their galactic empires with taglines like, "Dominating since Stardate, whatever," and "Your resources are technically already ours." It's the cosmic equivalent of a toddler putting on their parents' shoes and declaring themselves the new head of household. The Vex Moray were the universe's most pretentious toddlers. For roughly 3,000 years, the Vex Mori had been gallivanting across the Orion Arm with their harvester fleets, consuming sentient species with the casual indifference of someone eating popcorn during a movie. Not out of malice, mind you, though that would have at least given them some depth of character, but because they had developed technology that converted the neural energy of conscious beings into fuel. And like any good addict with access to an unlimited supply, they just couldn't help themselves. It's a matter of evolutionary superiority. Their supreme executor Zithkal had once explained to the ambassadors of the Proxima Coalition, right before turning their home planets into the equivalent of cosmic gas stations. Your existence serves the greater purpose of our expansion. The Proxima representatives would have found this reasoning more compelling had they not been liquefied 5 minutes later. Earth had initially registered on Vex Mori scans as barely worth the fuel expenditure to reach it, classified as an M3 development world. A designation that in the Vex Mori cataloging system translated roughly to, "They've figured out computers but still argue about whether climate change is real, so they're basically cosmic toddlers." The expected yield from harvesting humanity was calculated to power perhaps 3 of their mid-sized cruisers for a standard galactic year. Hardly worth the administrative paperwork. But resources in their usual harvesting grounds were dwindling, and the Vex Mori fleet commander Vextool was behind on his quotas. Careers in the harvest division of the Vex Mori Empire didn't end with retirement parties and commemorative quantum crystals. They ended with you becoming part of the next fuel batch. Plot a course for Solar System Designation 37294, Vextool had commanded with all the enthusiasm of someone agreeing to pick up milk on the way home. Let's get this over with. If only he had known that cosmic punchlines often come at the expense of those who think they're telling the jokes. The day the Vex Mori arrived in Earth's orbit was by cosmic standards entirely unremarkable. By human standards, it was a Tuesday, which is widely regarded throughout the galaxy as the most aggressively mediocre day of the week. Commander Eliza Ellis was in the middle of her third coffee and second existential crisis of the morning when the alert came through to United Earth Defense Headquarters. "Ma'am, we've got unidentified objects decelerating from FTL at the edge of lunar orbit," the sensor technician reported, impressively maintaining his military bearing despite visibly questioning every life choice that had led him to this moment. Ellis looked up from her terminal, where she'd been reviewing budget requests for the Lunar Defense Grid, a project that half of Earth's governments had dismissed as paranoid fantasy and a waste of resources that could be better spent on literally anything else. The irony was not lost on her. "Finally," she said, setting down her coffee mug that read, "I survived first contact," with a question mark hastily drawn after it in marker. "Activate Protocol Epsilon, and someone get Chief Scientist Kowalski up here before he starts another one of his theoretical experiments. I'm still finding glitter in my office from the last one." Protocol Epsilon, contrary to what the Vex Mori would have expected from an M3 world, wasn't a series of panicked messages begging for mercy or offers of submission. It was the activation of Earth's planetary defense system, a network of satellites, orbital platforms, and ground-based installations that humanity had been quietly building for the past 70 years, ever since a certain incident in Roswell had convinced a select few that perhaps humanity wasn't alone in the universe. The Vex Mori approach was textbook, a demonstration of force designed to shock and awe the primitive species into submission. 3 of their harvester ships, each roughly the size of Manhattan, deployed in a triangular formation above the planet, while broadcasters began transmitting the standard pre-harvest message in every human language simultaneously. "People of Earth," the translation blared from every communication device worldwide, "we are the Vex Mori Collective. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our fuel reserves. Resistance is both futile and unnecessary. We will make this process painless. You should feel honored to serve the greater purpose of galactic advancement." In the Vex Mori command ship, Fleet Commander Vextool reclined in his command throne, absently picking at something stuck between his 4 rows of teeth. The view screen showed various human military installations, scrambling to respond, and he found it vaguely amusing, like watching insects scatter when a rock is overturned. "Standard harvesting protocols," he ordered with a dismissive wave of his upper appendage. "Begin with their military installations to minimize resistance, then urban centers, then rural areas, the usual." His second-in-command, Subcommandant Nexval, bowed slightly. "Shall I prepare the collection vessels, Commander?" Yes, Vextool said with the enthusiasm of someone agreeing to attend a distant relative's poetry recital. "And do try to be efficient. I'd like to be back in Vex Mori space before the Grand Confluence begins." The first Vex Mori harvesting beam targeted the North American Defense Command. A reasonable choice strategically, if not for the fact that NORAD had been a decoy for the past 20 years. The actual command center was distributed across 12 underwater facilities and one particularly unassuming dairy farm in Wisconsin. The second beam targeted Beijing's military district, which responded by activating what the Chinese government had been insisting was definitely not a particle weapon array during the last 7 UN inspections. The third beam never deployed because by then humanity had decided that the appropriate response to "we come in peace to liquidize you" was roughly 5,000 kinetic orbital missiles, 300 focused electromagnetic pulse cannons, and what Chief Scientist Kowalski had enthusiastically referred to as "a little something I've been working on in my spare time" that somehow bent light around the Vex Marie's third vessel, creating the impression that it was simultaneously imploding and turning inside out. It wasn't, of course. Physics doesn't work that way, but it distracted the Vex Mori crew long enough for the actual attack to disable their primary systems. In the UED command center, Ellis watched the holographic display as humanity's response unfolded. Beside her, Kowalski bounced on his heels like a child on a sugar rush. "They didn't expect that, did they?" he said, grinning maniacally. "Nobody expects the human inquisition." Ellis shot him a look that could have flash-frozen nitrogen. "We're facing an alien invasion, and you're making Monty Python references?" "To be fair," Kowalski replied, entirely unrepentant, "if we're all going to be turned into alien fuel, I'd rather go out on a laugh." "We're not going to be turned into anything," Ellis said, turning back to the display where one of the Vex Mori ships was now drifting, its systems clearly compromised. "Get me a boarding team ready. I want to know everything about these bastards before they know we know anything." The thing about species that evolve to consume others is that they rarely evolve robust defense mechanisms themselves. Why bother when you're at the top of the food chain? The Vex Mori had become so accustomed to being the harvesters that they had forgotten what it was like to be the crop. This oversight became painfully apparent when the human boarding teams, led by Major Devin Wong, breached the disabled Vex Mori vessel and discovered that despite their advanced technology, the aliens had approximately the physical resilience of overripe bananas and the combat training of particularly pacifistic accountants. "This is Major Wong," came the report over the comm channel. "You're not going to believe this, Commander, but I think we just took control of an alien warship with what amounts to harsh language and intimidating posture." Chief Scientist Kowalski was assigned to the captured vessel within hours, leading a team of Earth's most brilliant minds, and, as he insisted, his emotional support iguana, "Frederick, these systems are fascinating," Kowalski muttered as he examined the Vex Mori engine room. "They're converting neural energy directly into propulsion power. It's like they've found a way to use consciousness itself as fuel." Lieutenant Patel, his assistant, frowned. "That's horrifying." "Oh, absolutely," Kowalski agreed, entirely too cheerfully for someone discussing industrial-scale sentient being liquidation. "Ethically reprehensible, morally bankrupt, fundamentally evil." He paused, tapping his chin. "But the engineering is brilliant." Within days, Kowalski and his team had identified the fundamental flaw in the Vex Mori power systems. They required a specific type of neural energy that the Vex Mori themselves couldn't produce, hence their need to harvest other species. But this specialized conversion process had left them vulnerable to frequency disruption. "It's like they built a beautiful house with no doors," Kowalski explained to the UED Council, and then decided the solution was to steal everyone else's doors rather than design their own. "We can use this." And use it they did. Human ingenuity, when faced with extinction, tends to accelerate at rates that would make even light consider taking performance-enhancing substances. Within weeks, Earth's combined scientific community had reverse-engineered enough Vex Mori technology to develop what Kowalski dramatically named the Nope Gun, a device that disrupted the neural energy conversion process and turned the Vex Mori's greatest strength into their most catastrophic vulnerability. The counterattack, designated Operation Backfire because someone in military naming had apparently developed a sense of humor, began exactly 1 month after the Vexmori's arrival. Admiral Lien Chen, commanding Earth's hastily retrofitted space fleet from the repurposed Vexmori vessel, which had been renamed Calm as a Bitch, in what the UN Security Council described as perhaps not the most diplomatically nuanced choice, led the charge. "All vessels, this is Admiral Chen," she broadcast from the command deck. "The Vexmori came here to harvest us. Instead, they've provided us with the means to ensure humanity's place among the stars. Today, we return the favor." She paused, then added with undisguised satisfaction, "Let's take out the trash." The battle that followed would later be described in human history texts as the Great Cosmic Uno Reverse Card. The Vexmori reinforcement fleet, arriving to investigate why their harvesting team had gone silent, found themselves facing not the expected cowering pre-FTL civilization, but 26 Earth vessels equipped with their own technology turned against them with the kind of vicious efficiency that only comes from a species that had spent most of its evolutionary history perfecting the art of using an opponent's strength against them. "They're retreating," reported Tactical Officer Rivera, disbelief evident in his voice as the Vexmori vessels began a chaotic withdrawal. "Don't just let them go," Chen ordered, her expression reminiscent of a cat that had just cornered a particularly juicy mouse. "I want a tracking device on every ship. They're going to lead us right to their homeworld." And lead them they did. The Vexmori homeworld, Vexmoriana, orbited a dying star in a system so unremarkable that even the most thorough astronomical surveys had overlooked it, which had suited the Vexmori just fine. Their entire civilization was built around the principle of taking rather than creating, harvesting rather than growing. Their planet reflected this philosophy, a world stripped of natural resources, its surface covered in processing facilities and refineries, its atmosphere a toxic soup of industrial byproducts. At its core, however, was something truly remarkable, a natural phenomenon that the Vexmori had adapted into what they called the Grand Confluence, a quantum singularity that processed and amplified neural energy on a scale that defied conventional physics. Professor Emilio Rodriguez, brought aboard the human flagship specifically to study Vexmori quantum mechanics, stared at the readings with the kind of awe usually reserved for religious experiences or particularly impressive dessert trolleys. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "They've harnessed a quantum state that exists simultaneously across multiple dimensions. The energy potential is incalculable. Can we use it?" Admiral Chen asked, ever practical. Rodriguez turned to her, his eyes wide with possibilities. "Admiral, with this technology, we wouldn't just match the Vexmori, we'd surpass them. We could create drive systems that would make their harvesting technology look like a child's chemistry set." The moral debate that followed was surprisingly brief for a discussion about potentially becoming the very thing they had fought against. Humanity, it turned out, was quite comfortable with ironic justice when it meant survival. "We're not going to harvest sentient beings," Commander Ellis insisted during the Emergency Council session. "That's non-negotiable. But their world, this quantum core, that's different." "Is it, though?" asked UN Secretary-General Okonkwo. "Are we not still taking what isn't ours?" Admiral Chen's response was simple and cut through the philosophical hand-wringing. "They came to our home to turn us into fuel. Poetic justice may not be the most ethically pure stance, but it has a certain symmetry that I, for one, can live with." In the end, the decision was made. Earth would use the Vexmori's own technology against them, not to harvest their consciousness, but to convert their world's quantum core into a power source for humanity's new fleet. Professor Rodriguez led the adaptation team, taking the Vexmori's neural energy conversion technology and modifying it to interface with the quantum singularity at Vexmoriana's core. The result was the Harvest Drive, a propulsion system that drew power directly from the dimensional boundary phenomena of the Vexmori homeworld. "It's like having a gas pump that reaches across space," Rodriguez explained to the military brass. "The ships don't need to carry fuel because they're constantly drawing it from the source." The irony was not lost on anyone. The Vexmori had built an empire on harvesting other worlds, and now their world would fuel humanity's expansion among the stars. The final confrontation with the Vexmori wasn't much of a confrontation at all. Faced with humanity's new technology and the realization that their homeworld was now effectively an extension of Earth's power grid, Supreme Executor Zithkal did what any self-respecting tyrant would do when faced with certain defeat. He demanded unconditional surrender from his opponents. Admiral Chen's response, broadcast across all Vexmori frequencies, was succinct. That's adorable. The human fleet, now powered by harvest drive technology, surrounded Vex Moriana with the kind of overwhelming force that rendered resistance not just futile but frankly embarrassing. The Vex Mori military, accustomed to preying on defenseless civilizations, found themselves woefully unprepared for an enemy that had turned their own tactics against them. Zithgal's surrender, when it finally came, was delivered with the kind of incredulous outrage that can only come from a bully who's been thoroughly thrashed by their intended victim. "This is a violation of the natural order," he spluttered from his palace as human forces secured the planet's surface. "We are the harvesters. We are the apex predators of the galaxy." "Funny thing about apex predators," Commander Ellis replied as she personally accepted his surrender. "They tend to get complacent, and complacency is just evolution's way of saying, your time is up." The terms of surrender were simple. The Vex Mori would dismantle their harvesting fleet, free any world still under their control, and accept Earth's authority over their homeworld, which was now, for all intents and purposes, humanity's filling station. "You're turning us into a resource," Zithgal realized with dawning horror. "You're harvesting us?" "Not you," Ellis corrected. "Just your world. We're not monsters after all." She smiled, and it wasn't entirely friendly. "We'll leave that particular evolutionary niche to you." Within months, the former Vex Mori Empire had been reduced to a single world, its fleet repurposed or dismantled, its conquered territories freed. And at the center of it all was the harvest drive connection, a constant reminder that the cosmic wheel turns for everyone. Eventually, the ripples of humanity's sudden leap to galactic power status spread through the interstellar community with the subtlety of a supernova in a Zen meditation garden. Species that had lived in fear of the Vex Mori for millennia now looked to Earth with a mixture of gratitude, awe, and not a small amount of concern. After all, the humans had done in months what entire civilizations had failed to accomplish in centuries. The arachnid consortium of Rigel sent ambassadors bearing gifts of synthesized precious metals. "We offer friendship to those who defeated the Devourers," their High Weaver announced in Earth's newly established Galactic Relations Center, all 8 appendages weaving intricate patterns that their translator explained meant deep respect with a side order of existential terror. Though we cannot help but wonder if we have simply exchanged one predator for another, the crystalline minds of Tau Ceti were more direct. The Vex Mori consumed bodies. Will humanity now consume worlds? It was a fair question, and one that humanity itself wrestled with. The harvest drive technology represented power on a scale previously unimaginable, but it came with the uncomfortable parallel to the very civilization they had defeated. "We've become the very thing we fought against," argued Professor Dmitry Volkov during a particularly heated debate at the United Nations Interstellar Ethics Committee. "We're powering our expansion with another world's resources. The methodology may differ, but the moral equation remains uncomfortably similar." "There's a fundamental difference," countered Dr. Amara Okafor, pounding the podium with enough force to make the holographic projectors skip. "We're not consuming sentient beings. We're using a natural phenomenon that the Vex Mori happen to live near. Their fault for building their empire around a cosmic lottery ticket they didn't earn." 10 years after the surrender of the Vex Mori, humanity had established colonies on 17 worlds across 7 star systems. The harvest drive technology had transformed space travel from a resource-intensive endeavor requiring massive fuel reserves to something approaching casual convenience. Commercial passenger liners advertised weekend getaways to Alpha Centauri with the same nonchalance that 20th century travel agencies had once promoted trips to Bermuda. Admiral Chen, now heading the United Earth Exploration Command, had pushed the boundaries of human expansion further with each passing year. Her flagship, the UES Consequence, because subtlety had never been humanity's strong suit, had mapped potential colony sites as far as 50 light-years from Earth. "We've got the technology and the momentum," she argued during budget hearings. "If we don't expand now, someone else will fill the power vacuum the Vex Mori left behind." Not everyone agreed with this aggressive expansion. A movement calling itself Earthbound gained traction, arguing that humanity was repeating the Vex Mori's mistakes on a grander scale. "We're becoming addicted to their quantum core just as they became addicted to neural harvesting," warned Earthbound's charismatic leader, Dr. Theo Washington, during a rally that filled Central Park. "And addictions always demand more sacrifices as they progress." The debate might have remained academic if not for what later became known as the Proxima incident. The human research vessel Oppenheimer was conducting a survey of Proxima Centauri b when it encountered something unexpected. Survivors of the Proxima Coalition thought to have been completely harvested by the Vex Mori decades earlier. A small population had hidden themselves in vast underground caverns, preserving their civilization while the Vex Mori stripped their surface world. "They're calling us the new harvesters," Captain Reza Tabrizi reported back to Earth Command. "They're refusing all contact. Their transmissions indicate they believe we've simply taken over the Vex Mori operation." The revelation sent shockwaves through human society. One thing was viewing themselves as liberators of the galaxy, quite another to discover they were being viewed as the next wave of conquerors. In response, Admiral Ellis, who had by now been appointed as Earth's first galactic ambassador, proposed the Restoration Initiative. "If we're going to use the power we've taken from the Vex Mori, we damn well better use it for something better than they did," she argued, before the newly formed Interstellar Council. The Restoration Initiative diverted 20% of Earth's harvest drive energy allotment to rebuilding worlds devastated by the Vex Mori. Teams of human engineers and scientists, working alongside survivors from harvested worlds, developed technology to accelerate planetary healing and ecosystem recovery. On the Proxima Homeworld, the first restoration hub went active 15 months after the Oppenheimer's discovery. The technology, an adaptation of the harvest drive that channeled energy into environmental repair rather than propulsion, began the decades-long process of making the surface habitable again. "Consider it the galaxy's most elaborate apology gift," Ellis told the still skeptical Proxima representatives during the activation ceremony. "We didn't cause this damage, but we inherited the responsibility when we took their power." One representative, their crystalline exoskeleton still bearing scars from Vex Mori harvesting attempts, made a sound that the translators struggled to interpret before finally rendering it as wary gratitude. "Words are vapor," they said. "Actions leave impressions in the bedrock of history. We will watch what impressions you make." Meanwhile, on Vex Moriana, or Karma as it had been unofficially but almost universally renamed, the conquered Vex Mori were undergoing their own cultural revolution. Their society, once built entirely around consumption, was forced to learn production instead. Dr. Kowalski, whose curiosity had always exceeded his sense of self-preservation, had established a research outpost on Karma to study both the quantum core and the evolving Vex Mori culture. His reports back to Earth revealed something unexpected: genuine cultural change. "It's fascinating," he wrote in his 57th report, the previous 56 having been largely ignored due to their excessive length and tendency to include detailed descriptions of his increasingly exotic lunch choices. Without the ability to harvest other species for energy, the Vex Mori have been forced to develop alternatives. They're becoming inventors rather than takers. Their younger generations are developing art forms. There's even a philosophical movement questioning their species' former practices. "It's actually not terrible," admitted one Vex Mori administrator who had taken the human name Bob after deciding his original designation of Zyth Talmorvic Zex was causing too many human translators to develop hiccups. "We're learning to make things instead of just taking them. Some of our younger generations are even suggesting it might be more fulfilling." The journalist interviewing him had raised an eyebrow. "Stockholm Syndrome kicks in pretty fast, huh?" Barb had blinked all 6 of his eyes in confusion, not understanding the reference, but continued. "There's a movement among our youth called the Builders that actively rejects our harvesting past. They've been examining the history of species we processed and are attempting to preserve their cultural achievements. The most dramatic change came 15 years after the surrender, when a delegation of Vex Mori representatives requested an audience with the Earth Council. Their proposal was unprecedented. They wanted to join the Restoration Initiative. "We have been the galaxy's greatest destroyers," their speaker, a young Vex Mori named Zith Nala, declared to the stunned council. "Allow us to be part of its healing." The motion to accept their offer passed by a single vote. Professor Rodriguez, whose work on the harvest drive had made him something of a reluctant celebrity, watched the decision with mixed emotions. "The universe has a strange sense of humor," he commented to Admiral Chen during the commemoration ceremony. "The species that perfected consumption is now helping us perfect restoration. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemy," Chen replied, quoting an ancient Earth proverb. "It's converting them to your cause." As for Earth, the planet that had once been classified as barely worth the fuel had become the center of a rapidly expanding human sphere of influence. The United Earth government, formed in the wake of the Vexmori crisis, established diplomatic relations with over 50 different alien civilizations within its first decade. The Galactic Relations Center in Geneva became a hub of interstellar diplomacy, its architecture deliberately incorporating elements from every allied species. The central chamber, designed to accommodate beings ranging from microscopic silicon-based collectives to hydrogen-breathing giants, represented the most diverse gathering of sentient life in recorded galactic history. "We come in peace," the standard first contact message now began, "but we recommend checking our history before making any hasty decisions." It was perhaps not the most diplomatic phrasing, but it proved remarkably effective at preventing misunderstandings. Of course, not all reactions to humanity's ascension were positive. The hegemony of Arcturus, a militaristic empire that had maintained an uneasy truce with the Vexmori for millennia, viewed Earth's rise with open hostility. "They've stolen power they don't understand and can't control," declared Grand Marshal Kestic in a transmission intercepted by Earth intelligence. "The Vexmori at least had the evolutionary right to harvest. They evolved as predators. These humans are scavengers who found a weapon too powerful for their primitive minds." Their response was predictable, a probing attack against humanity's furthest colony, New Darwin. What wasn't predictable was the response. The colony's small defense force, led by Commander Miguel Ortiz, didn't just repel the attack. They captured 3 Arcturan vessels intact using a modification of Kowalski's light-bending technology. More surprising was what followed. Rather than counterattacking, humanity sent the captured crews home with a recorded message from Admiral Ellis. "We could have kept your ships. We could have reverse-engineered your technology as we did with the Vexmori. We could have followed your vessels back to your staging grounds and continued this conflict. Instead, we're sending your people home unharmed with this message. Don't." The hegemony, accustomed to either overwhelming victory or mutually destructive stalemate, didn't quite know how to process this response. Their next communication was a request for diplomatic relations, phrased with the kind of carefully calibrated respect that suggested they had finally bothered to read that history they'd been advised to check. The universe, as it turned out, respected results, and humanity had delivered results with the kind of spectacular efficiency that made other civilizations reconsider millions of years of assumptions about evolutionary development. "Perhaps," mused the ancient collective of Andromeda in their encrypted communications, "predation is not the ultimate evolutionary strategy after all. These humans, they adapted without consuming, they defended without destroying, and when they conquered, they showed restraint. They still turned an entire world into a gas station," pointed out one junior observer. "Yes," the elder replied, "but they could have done much worse. In the great game of galactic civilizations, that counts as restraint. And now they're using that power to restore rather than simply consume. That's unprecedented." The most telling change came 20 years after the Vexmori surrender. Professor Rodriguez, working with a team that included both human and Vexmori scientists, developed what he called distributed quantum core technology, a method of creating smaller artificial versions of the karma core that could power individual worlds without drawing from the original source. "We're essentially teaching the universe to create its own renewable energy," he explained during the unveiling ceremony. "No more need for harvesting neural or planetary." The first test site was, fittingly, the Proxima Homeworld. When the artificial core activated, powering the final stages of the world's restoration, the ceremony was attended by representatives from 97 different species, including a delegation of reformed Vexmori, their traditional harvester insignia replaced with the spiral emblem of the Builders movement. Supreme Executor Zithkal, now living in monitored retirement on a small island on Earth, where he had developed an incongruous affection for bird-watching and reality television, watched the broadcast with what his human caretakers described as something approaching humility. "We thought we were the apex," he told his biographer later, "but true evolutionary success isn't about consuming the most, it's about adapting in ways that ensure you're never rendered obsolete." And so the cosmic wheel continued to turn. The Vexmori, once harvesters of worlds, now contributed to galactic restoration. Humanity, once dismissed as barely worth harvesting, now stood as a stabilizing force in interstellar politics. And somewhere in the vast, infinite cosmos, another civilization was undoubtedly making the same mistake the Vexmori had, assuming that being at the top of the food chain meant there was nothing left to fear. The universe, in its infinite wisdom and spectacular lack of subtlety, does so love its ironic punchlines. Today's apex predator is tomorrow's cautionary tale, and the only constant is that someone, somewhere, is always about to learn this lesson the hard way. As Ellis, now retired from military service and serving as Earth's senior diplomat, liked to say at intergalactic functions, the thing about being a harvester is that sooner or later you discover you're just part of someone else's food chain. The trick is learning to be part of an ecosystem instead. The Vexmori had come to harvest humanity. Now, their homeworld fueled human engines that were, increasingly, being used to repair rather than simply expand. And the galaxy watched, waited, and wondered if perhaps this unusual species from an unremarkable blue planet had stumbled upon an evolutionary strategy that might, just possibly, prove more sustainable than consumption. The last word on the matter came, fittingly enough, from Frederick Kowalski's emotional support iguana, who had somehow survived not only the initial Vexmori conflict but 25 years of his owner's dubious scientific practices. Upon being presented with a piece of Vexmori fruit, a diplomatic gift that had taken 5 years to be declared safe for Earth consumption, the ancient reptile had taken one bite, considered it thoughtfully, and then promptly fallen asleep in a patch of sunlight. Kowalski had declared this the most insightful commentary on interstellar relations to date, and surprisingly few disagreed with him.